Yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank the gentleman from Ohio. It occurs to me that we're sitting here in a committee that's got a fancy name, a different name. There are people watching our very first hearing and wondering, are these folks serious? There are people who have spent their careers dedicated to the service of people in this country, working at the FBI, wondering, are these folks serious enough that I could be a whistleblower, that I could come forward and share information with them and they would actually do something with it and that something good could come from it. And I want to let those people who are watching, Ms. Parker and Mr. Baker, you're an excellent example of people who will come forward and make a difference. And I want to let those people know that I've come to this city for 10 years with one basic premise, which is this is the best country on the planet, the best country that's ever been. It's deeply flawed, but we owe it to our children to fix it. And that's why I sought to be on this committee. And that's why I thank you, Mr. Baker, and you, Ms. Parker, for being here, and why I invite others who are watching to please come to us. Find somebody on this dais that you trust and tell us your story so we can fix it. And speaking of fixing things, I want to talk about the FISA program, which, Mr. Baker, you've talked about in your testimony, particularly 702 parts of it that we are going to re-examine and reauthorize potentially. On the surface of it, it sounds like a practical legal concept that you would collect information on foreign targets who don't have constitutional rights, and you might incidentally collect information that pertains to U.S. citizens who do have constitutional rights. But because it was collected incidentally and not in pursuit of that U.S. person, oh, we'll go look at this data, you know, we'll put some policies and procedures, but the Constitution does not apply here because it was incidentally collected. Well, if the incidental collection were small enough, that might be a valid concept. The problem is we've collected millions of exabytes of data. When what you're collecting incidentally becomes the entire universe, I think you might need a warrant to go look at that information. And when the number of searches that is done on U.S. persons by the FBI, I'm not talking about CIA, NSA, we know in 2020 it was over 1 million searches into this phishing, into this database where you don't need a warrant. And then in 2021 it went from 1 million to over 3 million searches. This is problematic, and I hope we look at this going forward. Mr. Baker, you mentioned something in your written testimony I don't think you got a chance to speak about here today. Can you tell us what reverse targeting is and
Yes.
why we might want to be concerned about that?
Yes, and it's not well understood, but in a nutshell, here it is. The CIA and the NSA are forbidden to target Americans, as you know. They often, and as you said, the numbers are in vast numbers where they pick up Americans most of the time just by incidental collection, and the Americans are not really doing anything wrong. If they pick up information that an American is breaking the law or is somehow a threat to national security, those other agencies, the CIA and the NSA, are supposed to provide that information to the FBI for appropriate action, and action can't be taken on it. But in reverse targeting, which John Brennan, during the Russian collusion thing, acknowledged they were doing, they would target a foreign person who was close to an American they were really interested in. And then when they picked up that information on the Americans, aha, we got it in incidental collection, which that was all phony and false. It wasn't incidental collection at all. That is another thing that you in the Congress, on both sides of the aisle, can address and correct. You can institute penalties for them pulling this monkey business like that.
Mr. Turley, Professor Turley, I know we don't have a lot of time, but do you think, and obviously private companies don't infringe the First Amendment until the government tells them to do it. Do you think that Section 230 gave them some comfort that if they did that, that these private companies, if they sort of, when the government suggested to do something, that they did it, that they would have a safe harbor?
Well, I do think that Section 230 is becoming increasingly untenable. It was really designed on the premise that these social media companies and other platforms were not in an editing function, that they were simply a forum, a publisher. That's clearly not the case. I mean, we obviously have an extensive censorship system here that is in place. And so the premise of 230, I think, has largely been discarded. But the implications of what has been created cannot be really overstated. We're talking about a censorship system that affects billions of people, and we also have a confirmation in the Twitter files of the United States government pinpointing people who should be censored or suspended. That should trouble people regardless of your party affiliation, whether you want the government in that business. And I think that's worthy of a debate.
I think, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman.